Actually, what makes Fort Collins great is no longer a secret. It's all over the world. Magazines talk about us, and it's a simple fact. It all has to do with quality of life. And if you look around the city, we have a small city yet, but with big city benefits. If you think about it, we have things like a really good park system. We have open space that's been part of planning. We have medical facilities. We have clean industry. That was a decision that was made a long time ago. We have a university system. We have culture and art in our environment. We're blessed, of course, in that included in all of this, we're blessed by the fact that our weather is just awfully good. We don't have the major problems that other places have. So in this environment, we have everything that one could ask for, meeting the quality of life. We have a bike trail system that was put into place. We have all kinds of little details, a downtown that has been revitalized, and it's an historical downtown. So we have kept our roots as well. That's all of that. But the secret is no longer our secret, and we're getting flooded by people who have discovered us. Well, there were a lot of differences between the late 70s when I served as mayor and what we have today. We were basically an emerging town becoming a city. We had the opportunity to implement what was called DT Square, Designing Tomorrow Today, where tax money was approved for things like a performing arts center, for things like expanding the library, for things like redoing the appearance of our downtown, for things like upgrading our sewer system. So we were in a very exciting time of really becoming aware of important developments that lay the foundation for where we are today. Another perspective in terms of our issues at the time, think about this fact that I helped to celebrate the opening of the first Chinese restaurant. So we were still in the process of developing a foundation for recreational dining, everyday living circumstances. The other interesting thing that occurs to me, and I recall now, instead of Old Town being a major issue, Old Town was still sort of there in the background, a part of our history, but not a salient part. Downtown survival was a major issue. So today we are much, as I think I summarized in saying why are we such a great place. We have so many more things and so many different issues now as a result of what's happened over time. Oh, my proudest moment was something that was a gift in a sense, because the Lincoln Center, Performance Arts Center, opened during my term as mayor. I was designated as the Master of Ceremonies. The Fort Collins Symphony Orchestra played and did the last closing piece. And we had such a marvelous celebration. This was a major development for the city culturally, and I think for the city in terms of just making us feel like we have this now broader set of characteristics that we did not have before, and we could bring in all sorts of cultural and performance things. So it really did fit into a puzzle. So there I was doing the closing with about 1,000 people in the audience and waiting for the orchestra to end. Will Schwartz was the conductor of the symphony orchestra at the time. He turns to me and says, "Would you like to conduct?" My life didn't pass quickly through my head, but I did have several thoughts very quickly. One was, there's no way I can do this. I have no background in music. I had a music course, always watched conductors. Then the other thought instantly was, on the other hand, nobody is ever going to offer me such an opportunity again in my lifetime. So I said, sure, why not? He gave me his baton, I got up on the podium, and fortunately, I knew the piece. I got so involved in it that I forgot that we were ending the evening and people were waiting to go home. So, at that point, I reminded myself that it's time to close everything. And I did what I thought was the motion to end. Nothing happened. They kept playing on and on. So I tried another motion. Nothing happened. They kept playing. And finally, I turned to Schwartz and said, "How do you end these people?" And he looked back at me and said, "I'm not going to tell you." So eventually I figured it out. The only thing I could do is to step off the podium, step down, and then everybody went blah. But it was, in some regards, it was maybe the most enjoyable experience, rather than necessarily the proudest experience. But I do have a picture of that event. The greatest challenge actually was something that we never resolved. I would have liked to have said that we met the challenge and came up with a decent solution. But again, at the time, controlled growth was an issue. And controlled growth in terms of the expansion beyond our boundaries of the city have a lot to do with whether we can control water and sewer services. If the city of Fort Collins could designate how many new water taps, for example, could be opened, that controls the amount of development that's possible. The city staff and I convened a meeting with water and sewer district representatives to try to negotiate, because without control by the city, anybody in the county areas can build and expand because they have access to water and sewer district services. Our hope was that we could make it beneficial to both sides, both the private county groups as well as the city, and come to some kind of agreement. So I was the city council's representative along with our city staff, senior staff members, and we had several meetings. It started off sounding like there was willingness to consider, would we, for example, reimburse this water and sewer districts for what we were, in a sense, taking away from them? How much would that be? How much could we stretch in doing that? And our public utilities director involved worked out a very nice arrangement, from our standpoint at least, and it seemed reasonable. Their representatives seemed willing to talk, but by our second meeting, there were criticisms or issues about, well, but would you be willing to do this, or this is not sufficient, would you compromise by doing that? And our city reconvened and basically came back to the third meeting saying, we're ready to go. We'll make all of the changes. You just tell us what it is that you want. At which point the representatives said, oh, we're not empowered to make this decision. We have to go back to our boards. We were authorized by our council to decide then and there. This was not a good sign. So what happened was that by the time we had another meeting, it really broke apart. And it was very clear that there was not going to be anything that we could offer that would lead to the change. So that was a lot of investment of good faith, but clearly there is a huge difference in the two approaches and the two groups that led to a good try, but a failure. My fondest memory serving on the city council in terms of what I feel like I contributed in the long run. One aspect has to do with the fact that, as I mentioned, I think at some other time during this interview, we were charged with implementing the tax set aside for various Designing Tomorrow Today projects. When we were first given the budget for approval, because all of these projects had to be financed, it was the question as to what order and solving architectural design issues and so forth. So the total dollars didn't fall out naturally. It wasn't clear that because X amount of dollars was voted, that when we got down to the actual building and expenditure, month by month, how the budget flow would be. So one of the things I asked for personally was that instead of one budget at the end of the year, this is what we're aiming at, that we be given a monthly, month by month expenditure, expected budgets for the next month, so that we could see how the total dollars would flow and how each project could be managed. I think that was the first time that the city council body actually looked at such detail in passing budgets. So it was more than just an annual budget or a projected annual budget. Certainly one is the change of focus of the city council so that there is an understanding that more details and fiscal management issues are important. There is one other aspect that has been a legacy that is there for everyone to see, that didn't so much come with the city council mayor relationship, but was something that preceded it by about 3 years. If you drive down a street and there is a school nearby and the street is 35 miles an hour, you will often be aware of the fact that during school hours there is a flashing light that goes off to slow down the traffic for the safety of the kids. That came out of a meeting that I was at where the issue of safety was raised and no one actually could figure out what to do with how to compromise between the fact that these are arterial streets and you want to continue the traffic and prevent traffic jams, while at the same time there are times in which that becomes dangerous for the kids. And it was a simple concept. Why not automate it so that we have flashing lights at certain times? And the chief of police, who was at this meeting at the time, was called up and said, "Can you do this?" And he said, "We can do that." Now that didn't come out through the city council, but it came through the city, and it came through an earlier presentation that I did make as a citizen too. Those are some of the things I remember fondly of. Well, I think in terms of advice for future leaders, I think one major advice has to do with how I view the work of the city council. It all has to do, it's a decision-making process. It's a decision-making setting or task that city council members are faced with. I think ultimately, if you're in that slot, you're faced with decisions. It's important to recognize that information may be presented to you that are in fact facts, but they may actually not be facts. They may be in fact conclusions by the person who is making the presentation. So it's the task of the leader to be able to listen, to separate issues, to know what is actual data and factual information on which to base your conclusion versus those things which are other people's opinions or other people's conclusions from their analysis. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges to keep in mind as a person who may be in a leadership position. The other aspect that I think personally future leaders need to be prepared for is to prepare for increased diversity of our residents in the city of Fort Collins. We have evolved to being a more cosmopolitan group of people, but we are not at all representative yet of what I think will happen and will in fact be a characteristic of our city that we need to prepare for. Well, the crystal ball is a little cloudy right now because it's still wintertime. There are signs, though, that we can basically say are the roots of what is to come, or maybe it's just simply the hope of what is to come. Fort Collins will be a regional center for things like medical services, will be a regional center again, but maybe even larger and more unified for shopping. It will be a regional center for some sort of unique, I think, unique type of industry that we have yet to define. We sort of do technology, that may be the area, but we will, I think, have an identity that we don't quite yet foster. I would like to see the plans that were once put together for the Riverwalk. That will give us, as a city, a really spectacular, unique characteristic that would benefit just so many different sectors of our community. I think we're at the point where the one word growth is going to be always the main issue, and planning for growth, staying ahead of the curve before the growth takes over and overwhelms us in areas such as housing, areas such as transportation. And by the way, part of what my guess about the crystal ball in the future is that our whole transportation system is going to change somehow. And we will also not only change the nature of transportation, but we will be also a regional center of some sort. Before I forget my own affiliation, I think the university is going to change. And I think the university is going to change to become something more of the true land-grant institution that it started off to be. And by that, what I mean is there will be more of a collaboration and a true collaboration between what goes on in the university's visionaries who are doing things like urban planning and the city's day-by-day staff persons who are doing urban planning, so that there will be some sort of integration of these two types of expertise. The people who have the dollars, who have the practical issues, who have their own vision, and the people who have the freedom to think very broadly, to think ahead, and to be creative in a different kind of way.